Welcome, everyone, to the July 2025 meeting of the Humanist Society of Santa Barbara. My name is Judy Flattery. I'm the president of the society. Humanist Society of Santa Barbara is a 501c3 nonprofit. We're 100% volunteer run. We were founded about 30 years ago. Let us know if you're interested in joining our society or being in our mailing list by contacting hssb.membership777@gmail.com, and Mary Taylor, our membership lead, will be able to help you with that. Our speaker today is author and retired judge Mary Beth O'Connor. Name of her book was From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. And her talk is From Junkie to Judge Without God. But first, I'd like to connect this to what does this have to do with humanism? Why would we be talking about this at a humanist meeting? Well, if we look at the affirmations of humanism by Paul Kurtz, there's two of them that speak to me regarding this topic. One is, we deplore efforts to denigrate human intelligence, to seek to explain the world in supernatural terms, and to look outside of nature for salvation. And we're committed to the application of reason and science to the understanding of the universe and the solving of human problems, such as substance use disorders. So our speaker today is Mary Beth O'Connor, an award-winning author of From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. She has published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal entitled I Beat Addiction Without God, and another in Recovery Today entitled How I Attained 28 Years of Sobriety by Rejecting My Rehab Submit to AA Order. Mary Beth attended Berkeley Law School when she was 6 years into her recovery. She worked at a large firm, then for the federal government, litigating class actions. In 2014, she was appointed a federal administrative law judge and retired in 2020. Mary Beth is a board member for the She Recovers Foundation and a director of LifeRing Secular Recovery. She regularly speaks on behalf of these organizations and about multiple and secular paths to recovery. So with that, I'll introduce Mary Beth O'Connor. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. So this is going to be the agenda for today. It's a lot to cover, but we will have time for questions because there pretty much always are some. I'm going to go over my story in brief. I'm going to start with the basics. What is substance use disorder and why am I calling it that? I'm going to give some tips about substance use and recovery, treatment options, go through some peer support option examples, talk about some of the obstacles to choosing a secular recovery path. I'm going to provide you with some resources, and then we will have time for questions. So I say the short version of my story is childhood abuse led to childhood addiction, and that is a very common pathway. I grew up with a mother who wasn't bonded to me, wasn't interested in me, and could be violent. She could be violent at times. But things got much worse when I was 9 and she married my stepfather. And my stepfather was very violent with my mother. He was physically, sexually violent with me. It was just the kind of environment where I never knew what would happen. And also where what I did and what happened to me were not really connected. So it was a very high stress environment that sort of primed me to seek relief in what turned out to be some of the wrong places. So for me, drugs began when I was 12. My first drug was alcohol. It was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill wine, which a lot of people know. And what I noticed about that experience was how much better it made me feel. I felt like I could take a deeper breath, like my muscles were relaxed, but also like I was laughing and giggling with my girlfriend in sort of a more openly joyful way. And that really captured my attention. This is a positive experience. I need more of this. And so I pursued alcohol right away. I would look for opportunities to drink. I would make opportunities. I would even steal beer from my dangerous stepfather because that's how much I wanted the alcohol. But I also quickly added in weed. There were pills around, mostly sedatives, some stimulants. I did a lot of acid my sophomore year of high school. And when I was 16, I found what became my drug of choice, which was methamphetamine. And I was shooting meth within 6 months at 17. I was in full bore addiction when I graduated high school. I did leave my hometown in central New Jersey to come to California for college. I graduated from Berkeley. And for the first 3.5 years, I did better. And I will emphasize that better and good are two different words, but better. I used more alcohol, less of other drugs, mostly on the weekends. Sometimes it rolled into the week, but I had a really life-threatening kidnapping by 3 men, 6 hours rapes, moved in with a violent boyfriend during college. And so sort of the little bit of grip that I had on my drug use, I lost it. And in January of my senior year of college, I started using meth again. And I did not get sober until I was 32 years old. So it was a really long haul. By 32, I had really worked my way down the corporate ladder, not up the corporate ladder like you're supposed to do. I worked my way down it because I couldn't hold a job, because I couldn't concentrate and I couldn't get there. I was really feeling trapped and hopeless and debilitated. I was having physical problems, and my partner was ready to throw me out. So it was sort of everything in combination that made me finally say, maybe I ought to go to rehab. And so I did. I went into a longer term women's program. It was a 90-day minimum. And in my mind, I'm going for medical treatment. That's what I'm going for. I'm going to go get some medical treatment. And when I got to my rehab, I found out on day one that my rehab was vehemently and adamantly 12-step only. And 12 steps is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and all of the anonymouses. And 12 steps is a good fit for many people, but it's also not a good fit for many others. And it was a terrible fit for me. And I gave my rehab multiple reasons. I didn't believe in a higher power. I wasn't going to turn over my will in my life. I didn't agree I was powerless. I didn't like the focus on defects. And they repeatedly told me that I had to do what they said. There was no other way. They told me things like, my best thinking had gotten me there, to which I would always respond, I promise you, it wasn't my best thinking. They would tell me I was self-will run amok, basically just a lot of pressure to do it this way, the 12-step way. And that really took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting it. And at first I believed them. I mean, they're the experts. I'm paying them for treatment. And so I thought this must be true. And so I really had to stand back and think, well, what am I going to do about this? I can't do it that way. And so I decided that I was just going to keep my mind and my ears open and look for the parts I could use and just ignore everything else. And so I did what rehab wanted. I wrote what they wanted me to write. I did the homework. I participated in class, and they taught me some useful things. I got a little bit of the science of addiction. I got recommendations about how to build a sober network of supports and a little bit of therapy. And I read all of the AA Big Book and all of the Narcotics Anonymous texts. And I was looking for, are there any ideas underneath here that I can use? And so, 12 Steps has this one day at a time idea, which I found useful. If I was having a craving day, I would say, I'm not deciding for tomorrow, but for today, I'm not going to use. And then I looked at those steps again. They have this first step is that you're powerless over your addiction. And I didn't agree with that idea, but I thought about it. And I decided, well, what I can agree is that I am powerless to moderate. There's no moderating for me. And so I did what I could to try to fit in, but I really vacillated between some hope that I could recover like everybody else and really fear when faced with the universal consensus that I could not. And so when I got home from rehab, and by now it's January of 94, and for the younger people, I will emphasize there is no Google, okay? There's no Google. But I thought, is it really true that there's no other option? And so I got in my car and I drove to the library. And it turned out it wasn't true, not even in 1994. So I found some organizations I'll talk about in a little more depth. I found Women for Sobriety first. I found the Parent to Smart Recovery. And I found the parent organization to what today is LifeRing Secular Recovery. And I'm on the board for LifeRing. And my first reaction was just relief, like, okay, other people have successfully attained sobriety other ways, and that was a real weight off of my shoulder. But I really continued to approach it the same way I did with 12 steps. I got the books of all the new programs. I read the books. I went to meetings for all the new programs. But I was always synthesizing and filtering. I viewed myself as the decision maker. Which of these strategies and techniques do I think will help me? I didn't know anyone else at the time who did it, but today it's actually more common. And in LifeRing, for example, we call that a personal recovery plan. But I didn't know that, but that's how I built it. And I have been sober since 1994. I've got 31 years of continuous sobriety, so I think I did a pretty good job. Also, I had to deal with my trauma. I knew the violence was underneath my drug use. And so, like many people in sobriety recovery, I needed other help. Found a therapist with trauma expertise who, to my surprise, but correctly diagnosed me with PTSD, which showed up as very severe anxiety. And that recovery took a lot more work and was more complicated. But that's common to not just have an addiction, but to have something underneath, like other mental health disorders. Legally, because I do call my story from junkie to judge, I actually was accepted to go to Berkeley Law right after college. But remember, I started using meth again in January of my senior year of college. And so by the time I got to Berkeley Law in the fall, I was in no shape to do it. I tried for a while, but I couldn't get there and I couldn't focus. And so I gave back a top 10 law school because of my addiction. It was an agonizing loss. As I said, for the 10 years after college, I worked my way down the corporate ladder. And when I got sober, I had an embarrassing resume, although still my Berkeley degree and good grades, but I had to start where I was. I started with part-time, low-level work, and I worked my way into middle management at a high-tech company. And then at 6 years sober, I went to Berkeley Law School for real, actually went to Berkeley Law School. I worked at Big Law, and then I was a class action lawyer for the government. And then when I had 20 years sober, I was appointed a federal administrative law judge. I took early retirement in 2020, although if you look at this list, you'll understand why my husband says I don't understand what retirement means, because this is what I do today. I'm on the board for LifeRing Secular Recovery and She Recovers Foundation. My book is out, as was mentioned. I've had essays in the Wall Street Journal, Recovery Today. A lot of them are about multiple and secular pathways to recovery. And I'm a speaker, advocate, and trainer like today. All right, the substance. Let's get to the meat. So why am I using the terminology substance use disorder? I will sometimes say addiction because it's shorter, or I might say SUD, but a substance use disorder is the modern name for addiction. It's the medical name. It's what's used in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorders, because substance use disorder addiction is a mental health disorder. And so it's a person with a substance use disorder is the right way to phrase it. The other thing is that I think a lot of people don't really understand what the definition is of a substance use disorder. And these are two examples which will show you what sort of the key focus is today, which has changed in my 31 years. So, for example, the National Institute of Drug Addiction defines it as a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking. Oh, and by the way, whenever I say drugs, I mean including alcohol, okay? Alcohol is a drug. It's still the most abused drug in America. It still kills more people than overdose, despite the overdose epidemic. So drug means including alcohol always. So it's compulsive drug seeking and continued use despite harmful consequences and long-lasting changes in the brain. And SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, has a similar definition. Recurrent use of alcohol and or other drugs that causes clinically significant impairment, including health problems, disability, or failure to meet major responsibilities at work, school, or home. So you can see that the key definition here is continued use despite notable negative consequences. That's the key part of the substance use disorder definition. Also, I'm sure many of you have heard that addiction is a disease, and there are experts who categorize it that way, but not all of them do. It's debated within the expert community. Another way to look at it is that it's a type of learning disorder. And that analysis, as an example, is in Maya Salovitz's book, Unbroken Brain. It also can be viewed as sort of your normal habit formation process that's sort of run amok or is causing negative consequences. And that analysis, as an example, is in Mark Lewis's book, Memoirs of an Addicted Brain. But regardless of whether you categorize it disease or learning disorder, it is a brain disorder. It is a mental health disorder. The other thing is that, like all mental health disorders, addiction is on a spectrum. So you can have a mild, moderate, or severe substance use disorder. Just like you can have a mild, moderate, or severe anxiety, or mild, moderate, or severe depression. And also, hitting bottom. I'm sure many of you have heard people have to hit bottom to get better. That is not necessary, and it is not recommended. First of all, hitting bottom was never objective. It was never like once A, B, and C happened, now you've hit bottom. It was always retrospective. Now that I put together some sobriety, looking back, where was my worst moment? Where was my worst point? But the other thing is that waiting to hit bottom is dangerous. People die that way, or they may suffer serious and sometimes irreversible health consequences. But also, waiting just creates more damage. More years are lost. You're more likely to have destroyed yourself professionally or your family, to destroy your finances, your physical or mental health. So the earlier that the substance use disorder cycle is disrupted, the better off the person is. There's typically less damage and there's less to repair. So we try to get people to intervene and address their SUD at the mild or moderate level and not wait until it gets to the very severe level. Now, when I take that test in the DSM, I end up at the very severe level because I used methamphetamine almost daily for a very long time, and I got sober. It's not that you can't. It's just that we encourage people to intervene earlier. It's to their advantage to do so. The other thing is that quitting or reducing consumption can be beneficial even if you don't meet the criteria for having a use disorder. So let's just take alcohol as an example. Alcohol can have negative effects health-wise, even at moderate use. And moderate is 2 drinks a day for men maximum and 1 for women. But even at that level, alcohol increases cancer risk. For example, for women, breast cancer risk increases notably. It increases the risk of having liver damage or having damage to your heart. 1 drink a day will raise your blood pressure. So there's negative consequences even at moderate, but there's also other things to think about. Are you or is someone, for example, making risky choices when they're under the influence? Are they driving under the influence or being a passenger in the car of somebody who's under the influence? Are you regretting sexual decisions? Are you getting in arguments with your friends or your family or strangers that you wouldn't get into if you weren't inebriated? Are hangovers interfering with your work productivity or just with you living your best life? But another thing to think about is, are you using alcohol or other drugs to avoid dealing with any emotions? For example, are you drinking every time you get frustrated or angry or depressed? Are you using alcohol or other drugs to avoid a problematic life situation, like you're in an unhappy marriage or you're unhappy at work? Substances can give you short-term relief. And if it's occasional, you're probably fine. But if you're using it on a regular basis for those purposes, you're really going to be better off if you stand back and address the underlying issue. That's the only way you're going to resolve the problem long-term. So it can be helpful to think about your consumption, even if you don't qualify for a SUD, and make sure that you're making a conscious decision about the role you want alcohol or other drugs to play in your life. The good news. So I know we hear a lot about, I don't know, only 10% of people recover or 15% or whatever. That's not completely true. So the full picture is that perfect abstinence from day one is unusual. It happens, but it's not the norm. For me, for example, I used meth 3 times in my first 5 months. Well, that was a vast improvement. But some people would say I failed, succeeded. But that's not how I look at it. It was just part of the process of me getting to the point that I could sustain sobriety. But the other thing to know is that in their lifetime, 75% of the people who at one point qualified under the DSM test as having a substance use disorder, 75% will get to the point that they no longer qualify in their lifetime. Another positive data point is that at 5 years of continuous sobriety, the person has an 85% chance of never relapsing again. Now, 15% is not zero, but 85% chance is a very large number of having continuous sobriety. So I always like to share that good news. Treatment options. For some people, particularly at the more severe end of the spectrum, they need what's called medically supervised detox or medically supervised withdrawal because alcohol and benzodiazepine sedatives in particular, you can actually die from withdrawal if you have a severe use disorder. You can have seizures from alcohol and other medical consequences. So some people need to be supervised medically while they go through withdrawal. After detox, or if it's not necessary to have that level of detox, there are a number of treatment options. I'm sure most of you have seen or heard about 28-day or 30-day programs where people go inpatient residential. First of all, those programs are not 28 or 30 days because that's the optimal length of time. They're that long because if you're lucky enough to have insurance, that's what they'll pay for. But the reality is a lot of people don't have access to inpatient because they don't have insurance and they don't have cash. Plus, some people can't go inpatient even if it would benefit them. Maybe they are a single parent and they don't have anywhere to leave their kids, or they just can't leave their job. But also, a lot of people don't need inpatient. Not everybody needs it. It's generally for the more severe end of the spectrum. So there are other options, and one of them is intensive outpatient. IOPs typically have treatment groups, meetings with your counselors, etc., 2 or 3 nights a week for 2 or 3 hours at a time. So you can live at home and hold your job and still be getting fairly intensive treatment through an IOP. Some people just work with a doctor or a therapist who have specific training in addiction. There aren't enough of those doctors or therapists, but there are more than there used to be. Some people work with a recovery coach. That's someone who will help them build a recovery plan. Like, what exactly should your treatment plan be? Because it should be an individual analysis, which a doctor or therapist can also help you with. But then a recovery coach can also work with you as you're going through the process, facing obstacles, and help you through those obstacles. There's also medication for opioids and for alcohol. Opioids do also sometimes need supervised detox, by the way, in part because opioid withdrawal is very painful, and they can get medications to help with that through detox. But also, there are medications that help with people in early recovery, in particular for alcohol or opiates, medications that reduce cravings. The opioid medications reduce the risk of fatal overdose by over 50%. A lot of people use them for a few months or maybe a year, but some people do need them longer term. And then there's harm reduction. You've probably heard that term. It's meeting people where they are. Harm reduction includes things like test fentanyl test strips so you can see what's in your drug. It includes things like Narcan, which is an opiate reversal drug. It includes syringe services where you can get fresh needles. It includes a lot of other supportive assistance for people who are still using drugs in some way, but it's to help them have a healthier life and to not have significant negative consequences. And also, people who participate in harm reduction, they are much more likely to go into treatment at a later point than people who do not. Peer support. Let me first say that it's not like there's this hard line where all the religious people go to 12 steps and all the non-religious people go to the other groups. There are atheists and agnostics that make 12 steps work, and there are a lot of religious and spiritual people who choose the programs other than 12 steps for reasons other than higher power. In other words, maybe they don't like the 12-step sponsorship. Maybe they don't like the powerless idea. Maybe they like LifeRing's individualized recovery plan. So there's not a hard line. But these are some of the basic ideas of the 6 largest groups, although there are also others. So for 12 steps, they have that higher power idea. Turn your will and your life over to a higher power. You are powerless over your addiction. And it's also it's rigid program. If you don't like it, it's rigid. If you like it, it's structured. It's 12 steps. You do them in this order and you work with a sponsor to do them. So it's very structured. LifeRing Secular Recovery, as I mentioned, I'm on the board. We have a different approach. We call our plan the 3 S's: sobriety, secularity, meaning no religion in meetings, but personal religious beliefs are fine. But a lot of our focus is on that individualized, self-empowered recovery. So we believe that our members are capable of building an individual plan that will work for them. We have books and tools to help them, and the group is there to help each other build and modify and work on and improve their individual plan. That's one of the main purposes of going to group meetings. Smart Recovery is another option. They have a cognitive behavioral therapy approach. In SMART meetings, it might not just be people with substance addictions, but also people with eating disorders, gambling, other behavioral disorders, all in the same room. She Recovers Foundation isn't just for substances, it's also for recovery from trauma, mental health disorders, other behavioral disorders, gambling, etc., grief, overwork, everything together. And She Recovers, they focus on strengths and the journey to wholeness. Women for Sobriety, the first group I found outside of 12 steps, is self-empowerment focused. The goal of a Women for Sobriety is that you are to become a capable, caring, competent, and compassionate woman. And there's a lot of positive reinforcement focus. And Recovery Dharma is Buddhist-based. They focus a lot on inner wisdom and the individual journey. And there are others. But these are the 6 largest. And when newbies say to me, how do I know what group's right for me? My recommendation is research these, and 1 or 2 of them are going to sound like my people are there. Go to that one. That's where you'd be the most comfortable. So they all have differences, and the meeting formats can be different as well as the philosophy. So look at that if you're doing the research. And the other thing to know is that not everyone uses peer support. About 20% of people who recover from a substance use disorder do not. And so it's not mandatory, but the large majority of people find it helpful. Personal recovery plan, I talked about how I did that. Today we call it a patchwork or a hybrid plan, but it's really about designing your own program. And that doesn't necessarily mean alone. It just means that you're in charge. You're the decision maker about what's going in your plan. And there are a lot of benefits to that personal recovery plan idea or approach. And one of them is that you're gaining self-knowledge. You're really sort of doing an analysis, like, who am I? Where am I? Where am I trying to go? And how do I think I can get there? And building your own plan can create a sense of ownership. It can increase resilience. But it's also a way to learn self-efficacy. I talk to this a lot with LifeRing newcomers. It's a way to learn that you can guide yourself forward in life successfully. It can create a stronger sense of competence and confidence. But also know that recovery plans get adjusted over time. People shouldn't have the same plan on day 1 as they will at 6 months or a year, because hopefully they've had some successes and they're ready to take next steps. But also their focus changes, their circumstances changes, and they're growing. And so plans get adjusted. And sometimes that means giving up techniques you were using and adding others in. If anyone's concerned, there was actually a study that compared the effectiveness of AA, LifeRing, Women for Sobriety, and SMART, and found that they're all basically equally effective. There were some demographic differences among the groups. So, for example, there were some education and financial differences with, let's say, LifeRing and AA. And there was religious affiliation differences, but not, as I said, that hard line. Members of the alternative to 12 steps actually showed higher levels of satisfaction and cohesion. But for me, the main goal is the important thing is to let people know they have choices so they can find the right fit and increase their odds of success. And there's data supporting that. There's a lot of general mental health treatment plan data that if you participate in building the plan, you are going to have a greater chance of succeeding with the plan. There's a lot of reasons we want to make sure people know their options. As I'm sure this group is aware, the United States is increasingly secular. And generally in these studies, secular includes atheists, agnostics, humanists like you guys, free thinkers, and others. The recent studies show 21 to 32% of Americans fall into the secular category. It depends on how they define it. Sometimes they include people who are unaffiliated with a specific church, but who still believe in a God or a higher power, and other times they don't. So the data ranges depending on the definition. But the other thing is that the secular group has changed over time. Those who fall into the secular category live much more throughout the US now. They used to be more concentrated in cities, but now there's more broad geographic distribution. And there's also an increasing diversity of age, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. So it's important that people know about their secular choice in recovery. There are obstacles to multiple pathways. There are still about 40% of treatment programs that are exclusively 12-step. And the thing is, they often don't tell you that. So it can be explicitly 12 steps. Sometimes they will say either beforehand or when you get there that they're following 12-step philosophy. But it also can be implicit. It can be said, it is often said by recovery treatment people that, for example, a higher power or spiritual belief is necessary for recovery. They won't say it's a 12-step idea, but they will say that it's necessary, but it's not. Or they'll say that you have to agree you're powerless over your addiction when in fact you don't. They will have a one-size-fits-all approach rather than an individualized assessment. They'll give you that sort of ideology of your best thinking got you here, so do what we say. In the Bay Area, for example, we have a Kaiser, which is a HMO, one Kaiser that is fully multiple pathways and has meetings in addition to 12 steps, LifeRing and SMART and Women for Sobriety. And there's a Kaiser 25 miles away that's very adamantly 12 steps. And I know, like LifeRing, we have to fight for our members to be able to get through that program without doing 12-step things like get a sponsor. So if you're ever looking at a treatment program for a secular person, you really need to have the conversation up front about whether they support multiple pathways. But the other thing is that sometimes one of the obstacles can be friends and family pushback. If they only heard about, let's say, AA, and now you're saying to them, I'm going to do LifeRing instead, or I'm going to do Women for Sobriety instead. Sometimes friends and family get afraid. They think, well, you're not serious about your recovery because you're not doing AA. So it's important to help them get educated. Like for LifeRing, I hold a monthly meeting where I explain LifeRing, and friends and family are welcome so that they can understand the program and I can explain that it's equally effective to AA. There are also sometimes legal obstacles. So there have been multiple decisions that the government cannot mandate 12 steps because of the religious component, but yet it happens all the time. Now, you guys are part of the Humanists, and the Appiganani Humanist Legal Center has been involved in some of these cases, but it still goes on. And it's a big deal because it comes up in a lot of different areas of the law. It comes up for drug diversion. Are you going to get into drug court so that maybe you can get diverted from going to jail or prison? It comes up in sentencing decisions. And if you're incarcerated, if you attend AA, that might reduce your sentence. But if you want to attend LifeRing, they might not. It comes up in probation requirements, parole requirements, family law for visitation or custody. So it's really a significant issue in a lot of areas of the law. And so it's really important that we push back when we can and make sure that people have the option to choose other programs besides 12 steps. When I train judges, one of the things I tell them, because judges don't like to be told they can't do things. And so the way I phrase it is actually there's clear law that you can't mandate 12 steps. But what I add is, even if you could, you shouldn't want to. because it's not the right fit for everyone. And so if your goal is to have as many people succeed in your drug court as possible, then giving them the option of attending peer support programs other than 12 steps is going to increase the odds of success. And therefore, that should really be the goal. That should be the policy. So I try to frame it that way for them to get them to be a little more open to changing their policy. Resources. There's a lot of resources on the SAMHSA website. There's information about substance use. There's a variety of peer support programs. You can put your zip code into the SAMHSA site and get a treatment provider list. It's not vetted, but it's a place to start. There's also what's called an evidence-based practices toolkit. And I always recommend that this is a good thing to read before interviewing treatment programs. So you can ask questions and make sure they are following evidence-based practices, because not all treatment programs do. There's some research and data on the SAMHSA site, but NIDA in particular funds and is focused on a lot of the science, which there has been more of, although I'm sure we all know that those budgets are being slashed at this point. But NIDA's site has a lot of studies. I get email list of new studies that come out pretty much every day. It's important that we're moving forward in our understanding of addiction and recovery. In California, the Department of Public Health has a substance and addiction prevention branch. There's information, resources, a treatment referral line, harm reduction information. There's the website and the 800 number. Santa Barbara County has a behavioral wellness department, also offers treatment information, prevention info, harm reduction services, helpline, and other information on their local Santa Barbara County website. And now I will take questions, but just so you know, so my website, if you're interested in like my Wall Street Journal opinion piece, that's on my website, junkietoJudge.com. There's also a messaging feature through my website, although my email is also here. You can send me a message if you have a question or you have a speaking opportunity for me. I mean, now, a year from now, I answer all the messages. And then I'm on X and Blue Sky and LinkedIn. And I really keep my social media narrowly focused. I only post about substance use, recovery, trauma, mental health, and recovery. I post studies and articles and my recovery thoughts. So if you're interested in that, please do follow me. If you forget my name, all you have to do is remember the Junkie Judge. I'm very Googleable and easy to find. So I know I threw a lot of information at you, but I wanted to sort of give you the overview of where we are, and then I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. That was really fantastic. A lot of information, a lot of great insight, and thanks for sharing your personal story.
You kept referring to a personal recovery plan. What would that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but what you're really doing, so for example, when I talked about, do you have a mild, moderate, or severe substance use disorder, right? What treatment plan is right for you can partly depend on where you fall on that spectrum. Do you have insurance? Do you have access cash? Can you go inpatient? Do you need to go inpatient or do something else? Where are you with your employment? Where are you with your family and friends? Who can you safely interact with in early recovery, right? Sometimes you have to sort of cut people off or push them aside for a while. What activities are you comfortable with? Do you need other mental health treatment in addition to your substance treatment? Do you have physical issues that need to be addressed? So it's all of these things. And LifeRing, for example, we have a workbook called Recovery by Choice that goes through in detail and analysis of different areas for you to think about, and sort of it helps walk you through them. So depending on the person and their focus, the plans will vary, but it's really about thinking about where you are and what might work. And even for your recovery, which peer support group do you want? Are you going to be a turn my will, my life over person, or are you going to really want to reach out to as many ideas as possible? So it's all of those things to think about what plan is going to be right for you.
Thank you.
I guess I'm curious about the chances of success of people just throttling back rather than total sobriety. Is that, I'm sure that works for some people, but is there statistics on that, or is it all or nothing?
So when I was in rehab, they told me it was all nothing, but it turns out that's not completely true. So there are some people who would qualify as having an addiction, a substance use disorder under the test, who are able to later to moderate either their preferred drug or sometimes maybe not their preferred drug, but they could moderate cannabis. But it's the minority. And it typically isn't the people at the severe end of the spectrum, right? So the odds of being able to do that are going to be higher if you're more at the mild, to moderate end of the spectrum. And so when people talk to me about their desire to moderate, the first question I ask is, haven't you already tried that? Because most of us have already tried and failed before we seek out help. But also, if you are going to try it now, and it's, their personal decision, my recommendation is be specific about your plan, say exactly what you're going to allow yourself to do, and then be honest about whether you're able to do it. Because if you can't, that's information that may need to revisit it. But it is true that a minority of people are able to later moderate, typically people at the more mild end of the spectrum.
Thanks.
I have two questions. I have a family member who says she fights her food addiction every day. Does food addiction change your brain, or the desire for food, the hunger? Does it affect the brain? Maybe not like alcohol, but in some way that it's so constant?
So all behavioral disorders, which would include food, gambling, sex, gaming, all of that, what the commonality is the dopamine bump. Like the behavior is giving somebody the dopamine bump. But it is also true that for those other disorders, they also will have a mild, moderate, or severe version on the same spectrum, right? So you could have a mild version of a food eating disorder or a severe version of an eating disorder. So what the symptoms are, as in how much her brain is focused on it or how difficult it is for her to get it under control, can vary depending on where she falls on the spectrum. The other thing is that for all of these disorders, like sometimes I get asked, do people tend to switch addictions when they get sober? Do they just switch to something else? And the answer to that is, this is why it's important to figure out what was underneath the compulsion to do this behavior despite notable negative consequences. So for example, the two most common reasons are trauma that wasn't unaddressed trauma and untreated mental health disorders. And so if somebody's struggling to stay sober or they switch from alcohol to gaming, then it's really time to think about what's going on underneath that's causing that compulsion and that willingness to take those negative consequences and continue the behavior. And what was that? You had a second question, I think?
Well, I think you touched on it, because
Oh.
the second question was, once you cure one addiction,
Yeah.
I know some people go on and have others. And
Yes.
you just
Yes.
touched on that. What is there a name for that? Where
there probably is a term for it, but I don't remember. And the other thing is, a lot of people walk in even with sobriety, like walk in the room initially with more than one, right? It's not uncommon for somebody to have alcohol disorder and, an eating disorder or something else. So it definitely a lot of different combinations can happen.
Thank you. Thank you.
When I decided to get sober, I talked to both my psychotherapist and my psychiatrist. And I was surprised that they both said AA. And when I said absolutely not, I'm an atheist, I will not touch that, they said, well, you need at least some kind of peer support, especially my psychiatrist. He said, you cannot recover without peer support, period. My psychotherapist was more flexible. And in the end, I did get sober without any peer support. I used to think I did it alone. I realized in retrospect, I did not do it alone. I had the support of my psychologist. I had the support of my family, friends, etc. But I was not in a peer support group that met in a model. My question is, are you finding the mental health community becoming more aware of the alternatives? Or are they still like my psychologists and psychiatrists really ignorant of what the alternatives are.
So in my 31 years, definitely there is a greater awareness, but certainly like one of my roles at LifeRing is to try to speak. Like I do a lot of podcasts and some television and radio. We try to get the word out there. We do outreach to treatment professionals, therapists and others. But you're right. There is still a large number of them who either don't know of the alternatives or somehow think that AA is better and don't understand that it's actually not better, that it's much, that it's really should be an individual choice to find the place the person's most comfortable. But you're also, I think you probably were happy that you heard me say that 20% of people recover without peer support, right? And so I know more than they knew, right? And so yeah, but I mean it is useful for many, but it's not available for everyone. The other thing is that all of the peer support groups that I mentioned, they all have in-person meetings, but they aren't everywhere the way 12 steps is everywhere, right? And so like for LifeRing, we have a large number of in-person, but we have more online. We have over 100 online meetings. And part of it is because we were never in Butte, Montana. And so we have members who do 12 steps in their local community to meet sober people locally, but they do their program the LifeRing way and they attend meetings online. And so a lot of people do combinations now, like I sort of did. And in LifeRing, it's a personal recovery plan. Personal recovery plan means you decide what you want in your plan. And sometimes that can be doing other programs as well. So the understanding of multiple pathways, the understanding of different peer support groups, that has definitely increased in my 31 years, but it's still not as broad of an understanding as we would like. And I know I do what I can to try to get that message out there.
Thank you.
We were recently in Vancouver, and which is where Gabor Mate was, and the work that he does with trauma and the connection to substance use disorders. And I was actually surprised as we were driving down East Hastings Street that there's blocks and blocks and blocks of people on the sidewalks using and looking kind of miserable. And I think they do a lot of harm reduction there, like his book In the Company of Hungry Ghosts and things like that, needle exchange programs and all that. But I was kind of surprised at how many blocks of people there were there right there in the middle of Vancouver. Just wondering if you have any comments on that.
I mean, it's an issue in most of the major cities in North America, and a lot of that's got to do with housing costs. So sometimes the housing, the number of unhoused, the lack of housing availability, and open drug use, those are tied together. If people don't have a home to go to, and they have a substance use disorder, there may be open drug use, which is one reason that there's what are called supervised consumption sites where people can use drugs inside, right? So it's not out on the street and the syringes are collected and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's the same in almost every major city, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Everybody has a housing issue, and that the lack of housing ends up with people openly using drugs in the street. I will say that criminalizing it to me is not the answer, and I talked to judges about this as well. A couple problems with criminalization, and I wrote my LA Times. I had a piece in the Los Angeles Times talking about this. One problem is, first of all, the government acknowledges that substance use disorder is a disease or a mental disorder, and yet you're criminalizing it. Well, that's a contradiction, right? Another problem is that it costs 3 to 4 times as much to incarcerate somebody. In other words, you could treat 3 or 4 people for the price of incarcerating one. So it's an ineffective use of our dollars. And involuntary treatment doesn't work as well as voluntary treatment. And we don't have enough voluntary treatment. We don't have anywhere near enough voluntary treatment. But the other problem is that there's a vast racial disparity in the way we enforce our drug laws. And so people of color use drugs at the same rate as white people, but they are much more likely to get arrested or to be charged with a felony instead of a misdemeanor, and they get longer sentences. And so that also, to me, completely undermines the validity of our drug laws. And so for me, decriminalization for personal use is the way we should go, and reallocate our dollars, not just for treatment, but for housing supports and employment supports and other things to help people get back on their feet.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about the racial disparity. There's a wonderful documentary called The First Step. I don't know if everyone has seen that, where it talked about big sentencing difference guidelines for powder cocaine versus crack cocaine. And so if you haven't seen that movie, The First Step, I'd recommend it.
Yeah,
Rhett, you have a
they've
question?
been a little closer recently, but there's still disparity. But yeah.
Yes.
Judge Mary Beth O'Connor, I'm not sure if you remember, but we hosted you last year at Americans United for Separation in Church, Orange County. So you were so good that I wanted to come back and see you and say hi to my friends like Judy. Yeah, I picked up more hearing you do this presentation again, and you may have added some new slides. I can't remember all the details, but thank you so much for sharing all this. So just one quick question that came up from your presentation this time. You said back in college you were actually kidnapped. Did you ever find those people? Did they ever get ever come to justice, or is it one of those things where you escaped and you were happy to be alive at that point?
Yeah, no, I never reported it. I mean, I in my experience, I mean, remember, I grew up in a violent household. I saw how seriously the police took violence, right? And I was in Los Angeles, and LAPD had a horrible reputation at the time that I was there. I didn't trust that they would care, or that I would be treated fair. But also, the reality was, I didn't have names, I didn't have a license plate. I thought they're never going to find these people anyway in Los Angeles. And so, like many women, I never reported it. Yeah.
Yeah, I figured that might be the case. Yeah, that's unfortunate, but yeah, sounds like you've come a long way from that point. So I'm glad to hear things have gotten much better for you. Thanks,
Thank you,
Judge
Rhett.
O'Connor. Thank you so much for your presentation today.
Sure. And Mary Beth, please. I mean, I'm a retired
Okay,
judge.
yeah.
But thank you. But yeah.
Yes, thank you.
First of all, Your Honor, thank you very much for the presentation.
Your Honor O'Connor, I like that.
Your Honor O'Connor, thank you. 3 quick questions. At this point in time, do you know how many funds have been cut for substance abuse treatment since Trump took office? Second, where is the best place, if there is any right now, for pushing back against that? And the third part of it is, where does RFK Jr. fit into this?
Yeah, so I mean, the research in general has been slashed. SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, has been slashed. I don't know the exact numbers, and plus it changes, right? They fire people and then they hire people back. They cut a program and then they bring it back, and so. But I know in general. The other thing is they also have changed their priorities. They just issued an executive order basically trying to criminalize homelessness and double down on criminalizing drug use instead of focusing on treatment and harm reduction. So there were a lot of changes. The exact dollars I don't know, but there were a lot of changes. I mean, what you can do with, of course, the normal things that you would do for any political issue that, that is going the way you don't want it. You donate money, to reach out to your local representatives, that kind of thing. But I will say the legislation side isn't sort of my primary focus, but definitely it's a big issue. And as far as Robert Kennedy Jr., he's a very 12-steppy guy, and it's not clear what he's gonna, he hasn't said anything specific about things, except things like, let's put everybody on farms like they used to do and have them work, and that'll get rid of their addiction. And so I haven't heard any new evidence-based ideas come out from him. I've heard ideas that aren't evidence-based, and there's indication he's not supportive of medication for opioid use disorder. But so far, the policy changes that I've seen has mostly been dollar-based. They're slashing funds to local organizations. I know I just saw several announcement in the Chronicle about different organizations that are they're laying people off because of anticipated cuts or cuts that they're not sure about. I mean, small community-based organizations need to know they have the money in pocket before they can spend it. They can't wait on promises, or maybe it's coming and maybe it's not. So I know layoffs are happening.
Thank you very much.
If there are no more questions or comments, I just really want to thank you, Mary Beth O'Connor, for speaking with us. This fabulous presentation, lots of great information. Thank you for sharing your history with us and all these great recommendations. We all know somebody who can benefit from the information that you shared. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
If anybody's interested in becoming a member or making a donation, you can scan the QR code or Zelle payments to hssbpayments@gmail.com. We do what we can to have all of our events be as much as possible free and open to the public.